Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out on a Tuesday night to talk about food waste. This is great. I'm Alex. Thank you for coming, supporting your local independent bookstore, as well as a wonderful author and these organizers for our community. We appreciate it. This evening, we have the pleasure of hearing a discussion regarding food waste and food insecurity, both globally and abroad, alongside Truffles Trash author Kelly Alexander. Appearing with Alexander will be award-winning chef and restaurateur Sarah Cooney, who runs the Feed Well Fridges program in Chatham County and surrounding areas, as well as organizers from Durham Community Fridges, who we have throughout the audience. We'll hear from Taylor and Shar in a little bit, and you can talk with their team as well following the talk at the table in the back. You can also get your book signed at the back. In the end, we'll kind of clear out some chairs and get some space there so everybody can talk. But hope you enjoy the event, and I'm going to turn it over now to Kelly.
Thank you. Hi. You can all hear me okay? Yeah? Great. Thank you for coming. I would like to thank just about everyone here. The acknowledgments in this book are extensive, so I'll stop. But I just want to say this wouldn't exist without Elaine Masner, who purchased this book and decided to run with it for the UNC Press, and not without Lauren Starn, who is the reason I went to graduate school in anthropology at Duke in the first place, and numerous colleagues. I have 3 work spouses, and they're all here, for example. Also to my partner, Andrew Davidson, without whom just that goes that way. But I would like to say to all of you, it's exciting that people want to hear about food waste and want to hear about my research. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and read to you a couple of ethnographic snapshots from the book about my time in Brussels. Then Sarah and I are going to have a dialogue about what's going on here in our local community about recirculating surplus, unsellable, but edible food, which is, for the purposes of my project, how I'm going to define food waste for you today. Okay? Sound good? That's the plan. All right. I'm very fond of this meme, how it started, how it's going, even though it's old and dated. But it helps me tell this story of how my research started, which was in a truffle restaurant in Brussels, a Michelin 2-starred restaurant, where I thought I wanted to conduct ethnographic field work on the value of food. And then it ended, that's one of my very last days of field work, making crepes in a zero food waste pop-up kitchen in an abandoned meat market in Brussels. And so what the book tells the story of is how I went from A to B, and all of the food that got recirculated by me and many, many other people in that process. So started with the truffle. Has anybody here never eaten a truffle? Which lots of people haven't eaten truffles. They're really, really expensive. Hundreds of dollars an ounce. And so my idea for what I wanted to study was how something that looks like that, which a lot of people mistake as a mushroom, but is actually a piece of dirt. It's a spore on a tuber. But it's one of the most expensive, if not the single most expensive edible commodity in the world. That is the largest truffle that has been found to date. It's about 2 pounds. It sold for $300,000 to a truffle collector in Macau. So one of my questions was, why would someone pay so much money for such a piece of dirt like that? I think truffles are delicious, but they are dirty and they taste of the earth. And so there are about 5 restaurants in the world that are designated truffle restaurants. And I sent letters to all of them offering my services and basically begging to come and work for free so I could work around truffles and see how people were using them and what chefs were doing with them and really who was paying for them. My big question. None of them answered except one. So I was 0 for 4, and then 1 answered. And the one that answered was a truffle restaurant in Brussels called Le Truffe Noir, the black truffle. It's owned by a man, this man here, named Luigi Cicciariello. I could write a whole book about Luigi, maybe someday I will, who's an Italian man from he says, the heel of the boot, a really, really poor town in Puglia. He went to college on a war bond, his father's war bond from World War II. He studied hospitality, and he was really good at it. He also, I should say, quit school at the age of 9 to work in his family's restaurants. He was a restaurant lifer. But his chief talent in the world is being an incredibly charismatic host. He is the definition of hospitality. He speaks 7 languages. And he opened his own truffle restaurant with the support of a lot of chefs he had worked for previously. So he took me to work in his kitchen because he said, you were free labor, you had the credentials to do it. I often have to be pretty careful with my students because they think you can just write to a restaurant and they'll say yes. But I had a lot of culinary training before. And he said, sure, if you can come and wash vegetables and work on the line for free for a summer, we'll have you. So there I am in the kitchen in Brussels. Some of my slides are out of order, so you have to forgive me. And big part of my job was washing the truffles every single day, brushing them with a special brush, washing them and soaking them, and then hand drying them because they were so valuable. That's about $2,000 worth of truffles right there. And then making these insanely fancy dishes. So that's squab with truffle reduction, and that is sliced foie gras and raw tuna carpaccio with truffles and truffle sauce. That dish on the end has 37 different ingredients and took me 6 months to learn how to make. I was really proud. And this is a butterfly of lobster tail and claw and smoked salmon and Tobiko caviar and 3 little spinach leaves that are the tail. So one part of my job was finding the 3 perfect spinach leaves, and that meant going through. So I want to say that this restaurant has the best produce that is available in Europe. It's top dollar, the most gorgeous produce you've ever seen come in and out of that kitchen. And my job was to wash all of the spinach and then hold up each piece individually to the light. And any piece that had any blemish in it, I was told to throw away. The restaurant also made 7 different kinds of fresh bread every day. And in the morning when we came, if there were rolls or kinds of bread that were not given to customers served, we had to throw them away. Exotic wild mushrooms that are not truffles, so shiitakes and hen of the woods, all kinds of great stuff in the garbage every day. Petit fours. If you got the check at Le Truff Noir because you'd already spent so much money, this plate came gratis, always with 5 different kinds of miniature desserts. At the end of the night, whatever didn't get eaten, thrown away. So I was raised by my grandmother and learned to cook from her, and she grew up in the Great Depression, and she never threw anything away. Ever. Nothing. No top of a carrot, no already cooked in oil, nothing. And so watching all of this garbage, I started a second project basically in my head of taking pictures of the garbage every day. And the other chefs in the kitchen made fun of me and they said, la American, la poubelle, the Americans obsessed with the garbage. And I was. My fieldwork notes were just pictures after pictures of all of the food that was in the garbage. And in case you were wondering, did I ever reach in and eat a chocolate-covered strawberry? Yes, I did, and you would have too. And so all of my research focus really changed because I couldn't handle it. And it wasn't that Luigi Cicciariello, who grew up really poor, was a heartless person. I asked him, and to be honest, he asked me, why are you always taking pictures of the garbage? And I said, how can you live with yourself? And he said, I'm in the business of selling food. This is what I do. People pay top dollar, and the kinds of clientele who came to Le Truff Noir are European diplomats. It's on Embassy Row in Brussels. It is around the corner from the U.S. Embassy and many other embassies in very wealthy countries. So actually, we're paying, just so that we as American taxpayers are paying for our dignitaries to eat at Le Truff Noir. So he said, I'm in the business of selling food and of creating beauty and beautiful experiences. I don't care if somebody wants to come and take this food from me, but I'm not going to pay somebody to go and get it. So I became really fascinated with what happened to all of this food waste. And at the time, I was busy taking pictures of all of that trash. This happened. The UN's report, Food and Agriculture Organization, released this groundbreaking report. They release one every year. This was the one from 2021. It wasn't the one that made all of this noise, but it looked just like it. In 2014, they released this report that had this data that was picked up around the world by the AP, the Associated Press, all the foreign presses, and it contained these 3 data points. And if you have at all any interest in food waste, you may have heard these. 1/3 of the annual production of food goes uneaten, accounting for 1.3 billion tons per year. That's metric tons. A metric ton is 2,200 pounds, so that's even more than you might think. Of the estimated 1.3 billion metric tons of food that go to waste, nearly all of it is edible and nutritious. And 1 billion hungry people in the world could be lifted out of malnourishment on less than 1/4 of the food wasted in Europe and the US alone. So this in Europe and the US alone part is really important to my research because I'm in Europe, in Brussels, the capital of the EU, when this report comes out. And this report made a lot of Europeans really mad. And the reason it made them mad is because they don't like to be grouped in with the US. They don't like to be considered as wasteful as we are. They would like to be considered as much more progressive. For example, they have universal health care. So, that's one of the reasons they like it. But here, I'm going to show you a couple things. It really made some people mad. Oh, maybe I can, maybe I can't. There it is. And the person it really made mad, this guy. That is Vytenis Andriukaitis. He's a Lithuanian cardiologist. He was the EU health minister, health and safety, food safety minister when I was working in Brussels. And his life story is absolutely amazing. As I said, he was a Lithuanian cardiologist. But before that, his family were socialists and they were sent to Siberia, and he knew food insecurity firsthand. He was very concerned that the EU was included with the US on all this food wasting, and he wanted to do something about it, and he did. And by the way, it is also next to impossible to have a meeting with an EU health minister. I was invited because I was interning at the food bank. By then I was interning at the food bank of Brussels, and the two men on either side of Andriukaitis and me are the food bank executives. And they said, we have an American researcher here, can she come? They said, sure, present her credentials. Well, it turns out you can't just walk into a meeting at the EU and be like, I'm just here to visit. You have to have all these credentials, and it was too late, and they wouldn't approve me because I was just an American student. But then Andriukaitis reviewed it before saying no, and he's an enormous Duke basketball fan. So you know what? After this meeting, we had to talk about Grayson Allen, and that is a true story. So he was really mad about what was going on with the EU and food waste, and he's like, I'm going to do something about it. And what he did was pretty amazing. He immediately enacted a compulsory policy on all EU member states that all large-scale food stores, supermarkets, like superstores kind of things, not little night marts, of which there are tons in Europe, but all giant supermarkets had to either donate surplus edible but unsellable food or face huge fines, like $100,000 an incident. And by the way, it was incredibly effective policy. Since it was enacted, only 3 times has it been violated, twice by Poland and once by Italy. And even then, that was already a pretty long time ago. That was initially. So what he does is considered very progressive. He's making this big move. He makes this compulsory policy, and he targets grocery stores. He decides this is the place where enough food is wasted that he could do something about it. It's not the only place that food waste exists on the food chain, but he wants to target the kind of food that is close to expiring and that grocery stores want to move off shelves right away that is fresh. And he also wants to target foods that have promotions on them, like cereal boxes and M&Ms, and if you don't win the trip to Hawaii, they have to get them off the shelves. So that's where he's making his stand. It's really effective. At this time, I am still cleaning spinach leaves. But I decide I want to do is start following this waste around Brussels. So I changed my research project, and I started with 3 sites. One, the Food Bank of Brussels, which was not new. It benefited in some key ways from Andriukaitis' compulsory policy, but it was there and had been there for hundreds of years. It was part of a Catholic tradition of charity that had been existing in the city of Brussels for hundreds of years. The Food Bank of Brussels, just to give you some sense of the scale here, is the largest recirculator of food in the country, but it's not really surprising considering it's had hundreds of years of jump on the other institutions, and the fact that it has 600 clients, 80% of whom are Catholic churches. So it gets its supermarket food, and it gets other food donations from the EU, and it recirculates them to local food banks. It's like a hub and spoke model. Some people go to work for food banks, and they think they're going to see people and have that joy of giving food to people. That's not what happens there. They just send it out to their clients. The other one is a social restaurant. A social restaurant is a job training program that exists as a kind of training restaurant. It's funded by the state. It's funded in part by local grants, and it's also makes money. It serves low-cost meals to pensioners largely, and it exists as a job training program for immigrants and refugees in Brussels. So this is me working there. That's Leopold from Togo, who's an intern, and my boss, Abir, who is Lebanese. And then the third one is an abandoned abattoir. Brussels has an historic abattoir. Lots of European cities do. There's a big famous one in Paris, so of course they wanted one in Brussels too. They used to slaughter all of the meat in the city there. In World War II, it was occupied by the Germans. Since then, there's very little amount of meat that is slaughtered there, but there's a huge weekend market for immigrants and refugees. So the city of Brussels invited Moroccan and North African and Turkish refugees to help build its subways and railroad stations after World War II. It gave them the promise of citizenship. You can send your kids to our schools. You can become a citizen. You can have our amazing social welfare and our universal health care. But it didn't do anything to help integrate, and not even to assimilate, just to create social programmings. And it didn't really pay attention to anybody else's culture. So that's why you're going to see, and when I read a little bit from the book to you, a whole lot of mentions of Moroccan people. I'm at time. Sorry, I have a little time. Because what you really want to hear about is the book. So these are some scenes from my food bank work. The Food Bank of Brussels is an abandoned Lipton tea factory. All of the people who work there make no money, who are the directors of it. They are wealthy pensioners. This guy in the center was a former vice president of Austrian Airways. These are what boxes come in looking like. One day we got 1,000 boxes of Kinder chocolate. It was post-Christmas. It's unbelievable amounts of candy. And then church vans come pick it all up. This is what the administrators look like, and this is what the recipients look like at almost all of the food banks that I visited. This is a food bank that's in a former hospital. One of the tensions I describe in the book, which I don't have time to get into now, but I will flag for you, is that Belgium is one of the top pork-producing countries in the world. A lot of food that is fresh that ends up in food banks in Brussels is pork. A lot of recipients of food banks in Brussels are Muslim who would not like to take pork home. They are often told that they are required to, they have to take it, or they won't get their benefits, and that they're encouraged to go outside of the food bank and trade it. One of the most difficult and challenging days of my fieldwork life in 6 years was trying to reorganize this, which was a big mistake in that I thought we should only give pork to people who ate pork and save fish for people who didn't eat pork, and there was almost a riot at the food bank. I am not kidding. I'm going to take you now. Hold on. Yeah, we're going to have to come back to this. Sorry, my slides are a little wonky, out of order. I'm going to take you now to the Brussels abattoir and give you a little shot of my field work. So on the weekends, the Brussels Old Abattoir looks like this. It's a secondhand market. You can buy alarm clocks. You can buy fruit. You can buy almost anything. It's really bustling. And during the week, it is like this. And sometimes you see a cow. So because of this disparity, an NGO called Culturahem, my husband took that picture, he's proud of it. An NGO called Culturahem formed to revitalize this urban space. And their brilliance in doing that is that they figured what happens on Sunday at noon when this market closes, there's a big bell and all the vendors who bring all their produce in have to either dump it or pay and wait to drive it back. So Culturahem formed and said, we'll take it. We'll partner with you and we'll take all the food that you didn't sell and we'll create some programming during the week to get this abandoned space occupied. These are the two founders, Eva de Bedemarker and Yannick Rolls. They had no background in anything related to food. She was a former English teacher. He is a soccer player and he founded a soccer league for disabled players around Brussels. But they created this NGO, this is their mission statement, to recuperate this market food and create some programming during the week. So this is what their programming looks like. Every Wednesday they have a zero food waste pop-up restaurant. Anybody who volunteers to come, can cook and eat lunch for free. Otherwise you pay €5 a plate. Some anthropologist once told me it's important to show a picture of you during field work so people believe you. So there I am. And there is my son, who's at a basketball game now. He had to come too. One other program they ran was sending this ingenious cart. So that cart is capable of making soup. It has all kinds of plugs and compartments in it, and you drive into this park and you open it up and take out everything you would need to make soup, including the produce, and you invite refugees who are living in the park to make it with you. That is us doing that there. But what I'm going to tell you about now is their third and final program, which is called Collect Met. So if all that food still doesn't get used up in the Zero Food Waste pop-up restaurant, in going to cook in the public market, in the public park, they have something on Mondays called Collect Met. And it is in one of the lockers in the old abattoir that looks like that. And you open it up inside and looks like that. And people start lining up 2 hours before it opens who look like that. This is a woman named Marie-Therese, who I'm going to tell you about, and these are scenes from this distribution. So I'm going to take you into one of the more challenging days of my field work, if you will permit me to read a little bit from this encounter that I had working, recirculating food in Brussels. It's called Encore de Menthe. More mint. People with all kinds of backgrounds come here. Jewish, Muslim, and Hindu traders stand side by side here peacefully, said the public relations officer for the Society of the Anderlecht Abattoir. That is fair enough, according to my observations, yet it doesn't go far enough either in terms of describing what happens here on Monday mornings. Every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m., the abattoir hosts 25 produce merchants. As soon as the market closes on Sunday afternoon, Culturahem, that's the organization, sends staff to the vendor stalls with which they have standing arrangements to collect their unsold produce, the items shoppers picked over and didn't choose. Then on Monday mornings, the staff and volunteers distribute these food items to anyone who shows up at the meat locker door to collect them. The abattoir is the only one of the 40 outdoor markets in Brussels to do this. The program is called CollectNet. Fathers, mothers, grandfathers, and grandmothers who cannot afford to buy fruit and vegetables for their children come for the apples, pears, bananas, tomatoes, lettuce, you name it, founder Eva de Bedemarker told me. Market vendors just give the unsold food to you, I asked her, and then the organization just gives the food to whomever shows up at 10 a.m. on a Monday? It seemed too good to be true, and one of those moments when I was made keenly aware of my utter Americanness, blanching upon the discovery that a good or service could be free. Yes, come and see for yourself, she said, and that is how I ended up at the abattoir on a day that the Royal Meteorological Institute in Belgium declared one of the hottest in the nation's history. Air conditioning hums in some of the abattoir's meat lockers, but not in this one. De Bedemarker allowed me to observe under a few circumstances. I had to work as a volunteer distributing food with the team, and I had to obtain the permission of all of the people you see to be photographed and quoted. So I've taken all the pictures that you've seen. Anyone that you've seen in them has expressly consented to it. They would like me to share these stories with you. A lot of people didn't, but the ones you will see here agreed. Once the terms were set, De Bedemarker told me what I was in store for. People who come to get food from us have a lot of shame. They may not look you in the eye. They may yell at each other. They may yell at you. Don't take it personally. Most who come are very, very poor. We organize other activities where you can sit at a table and eat a meal for a very small fee. But here you see the people who cannot even do that. If you cannot even afford an apple, you will fight like hell to get one, she said. Overseeing CollectNet on this day and on many others is one of the 13 diehard volunteers, none of whom are paid, but all of whom are given first pick of the vegetables to take home for themselves. Marie-Therese, that is Marie-Therese, is a grandmother of 7. She was 75 years old when I was doing this research, and she lived in this neighborhood all of her life. Her French has the heavy, heavy accent of a Bruxellier, which is a local term for speakers of a particular French-Dutch dialect that has been spoken in Brussels since the Spanish Habsburg rule, and that is vanishing, except for a few pockets of speakers. English, thankfully, was also pretty good. Marie-Therese has a thick ponytail that hangs heavy down her back and several missing teeth, and she proudly told me several times that she gave up wearing a bra a long time ago, and she encouraged me to share that with you. Many years ago, she said she went to a high school near the abattoir before she dropped out as a teen mom. She never went back to school. She spent the years of her highest earning potential taking care of her children and now grandchildren. She has neither a high school diploma nor proper writing skills in French or Dutch. As such, Marie-Therese exemplifies how women are far less likely to find jobs in Brussels than men, according to one report issued by the city of a desperate shortage of affordable childcare facilities for young children. Yet despite all this, Marie-Therese was, according to De Bedemarker, fierce and one of the most dedicated of the volunteers. When I saw her at age 75 lifting a huge crate of cherries, I understood. Marie-Therese handed me a green apron and introduced me to the other 2 volunteers, one of whom was Moroccan and wore a hijab and a black dress covering her from wrist to ankles, the other of whom had the same Bruxellier accent as Marie-Therese and was her daughter-in-law. De Bedemarker gave this description of all typical CollectNet volunteers. They are women, they live nearby, they are unemployed because they lack credentials like high school diplomas, bilingual language skills, or both, and they want fresh food. Fresh is an important distinction and unique. Most who receive social assistance food packages from places like food banks receive prepared and processed foods like canned soups and boxes of pasta and cereal. To be able to use almost all the foods, a recipient needs access to things like refrigerators, stoves, and electricity. If you have no food and no way to cook, then you are out of luck and hungry, and you come here. The first task I was assigned, gather bunches of parsley, some of it visibly on its way to rotting, into bunches. I was confused, but I did as I was told. Later, I asked Eva de Bedemarker, why were we giving parsley to people? It's not food. Her response, even if you are poor, food can still taste good, right? Next up, cut whole watermelons into single-serving chunks and wrap them in plastic. As I did this, I thought of my work as a prep chef in a fancy restaurant kitchen, places where the fruits were pristine like museum pieces. Unlike in those days when I was trained by a sous chef to produce fruit garnishes for the purpose of aesthetic perfection, this mission felt more hurried and haphazard and certainly less well appointed. I thought of the sharps knives in the kitchen with longing as I worked with a rather dull cleaver. But it was no less urgent and no less supervised. Marie-Therese watched me carefully, holding up chunks I could make to make sure they were the size everyone could get an equal share. At 11 a.m., we opened the door to the 45 people who were lined up outside waiting. They were 98% women, almost all wearing hijabs. The fact that this population is who show up for the lowest still edible quality food is some proof of Brussels' failure to integrate its waves of Moroccan immigrants. Marie-Therese told me that visitors know to line up upon arrival, as entry is first come, first served. She admits a few people at a time. The volunteers and I stand behind fold-out tables and hand out the produce. Each recipient gets 4 whole tomatoes, 2 bunches of parsley, 2 large hunks of watermelon, a couple of carrots, and as many cherries and zucchinis as they can carry because they are quite close to rotting. After all those in line have been through the door, Marie-Therese let in those who still lingered, about half the original crowd. They came in for a second time. And then after that, a dozen people were still milling around outside, and I wondered what they were doing. At this point, Marie-Therese produced, from a crate stored in the back of the locker that I had not seen before, bundles of mint and called out to those who were left, telling them that they could come in. Up until this moment, distribution had run smoothly with a couple of exceptions. For example, I handed a bunch of parsley to one woman who, upon inspecting it, shook it at me. She indicated she wanted a better-looking bunch. That was nothing compared to the mint distribution. No one had warned me about this ritual, a version of which I later learned took place every week and was the reason some people lingered. As a nation, Morocco consumes the largest amount of mint in the world. It's customary to begin and end not only each day, but also each meal with a cup of mint tea. Moroccans constitute most Middle Eastern immigrants in Brussels and in this particular commune, so mint is a very popular item around here and is expensive in the grocery store. While Debatemarker said she reserves most unsold mint for market vendors and her other programs like the Zero Food Waste pop-up kitchen, she does reserve some for this collection. As Marie-Therese warily invited in those who remained to come get a bunch, they were almost already inside the locker, elbowing each other out of the way. All the mint was gone in a moment, and the women wanted more. Encore de mint, encore de menthe, encore de menthe, they began saying, at first quietly, and then more loudly when none was immediately forthcoming. It was as if they knew that there was some more somewhere that was being held, which in fact there was. After 2 hours of offering mercies for watermelons, carrots, and tomatoes, these women had had enough. Those who had previously been pushing one another were now bound for a desire for an herb that connected them to their culture. Encore de menthe, they persisted. I imagined being unable to afford regular access to the ingredients and the foods that connect me to my own heritage. Matzo ball soup, challah, latkes. In that moment, I would have given the pleading women who were standing in front of me all of the mint in the world. Luckily for Kulturham's other programs, I didn't know where any more of it was stored. Marie-Therese held up her hand. Assez, she shouted, enough. She and the other volunteers, clearly having done this before, moved in front of the tables, spreading their arms wide and walking forward, causing the women to fall back and back and back, until Marie-Therese pulled the locker door closed. Amira handed me a broom, and I began to sweep the floor, now littered with smashed tomatoes, discarded rubber bands, and carrot leaves. Encore de menthe, encore de menthe. I could hear the small band outside the locker still chanting. After a few minutes, their cries subsided. Locked inside the storage room, we finished cleaning until Marie-Therese released us, opening the door. Sunshine flooded in. At the compost bin, a woman and child were picking through several crates of vegetables. That is Marie-Therese. She died earlier this year. She died in late 2024. She was my really good friend, and that was my most challenging day of fieldwork. Oops. But before I turn this over to my conversation with Sarah, I will read you a very, very short description of my happiest day. So this is a social restaurant that I mentioned before called Belmundo. That's an urban job training program. They hire interns who cannot access the job market for the same reasons that the other programs exist. It is funded at 4 levels. So one of the things that is interesting about Brussels that I don't have time to tell you about, but that is in this book, is that it has an enormous government. Really big government. So if you're not a fan of big government, you will hate Brussels. And in fact, it's actually this country of Belgium, in fact, all of it has a huge government. And in fact, it's really inefficient. It's horribly inefficient. They went 589 days, the world record for failing to form a government. And they're like, they don't care. They're proud of it. They have tons of political parties. They have tons of bureaucratic offices and red tape. It's really stunning. I was just being interviewed for a podcast, and someone asked me what surprised me most about this research, and it was how much I had to learn about the Brussels government, the many, many diagrams that were drawn for me to just understand the basic question of how someone would get social welfare services. I had a difficult time figuring it out. I can only imagine what the people who live there go through. All of that to say, what makes life in Brussels really in that big government so complicated is awesome for food waste, because the food waste initiatives are prioritized at every single level of the government. That's the federal level, the EU, the regional level, and in your local commune. There was money for food waste reduction efforts. So little programs like community fridges, all of the sudden, in the wake of 2017 and the recirculation efforts of Andrea Kaitis, had access to funds, and all of these little programs were up and running. And this was one of them. All of a sudden, there was a restaurant that had no food costs at all and could have these job training programs. So I went and interned there, and you can see what it looks like. It looks like an IKEA showroom. It also has a connected wood shop that does training for carpentry too. So all of that, table and chairs and lamps and stuff, is for sale. And this is what we did in the kitchen every day. It was amazing, amazing. Very different than Le Truff Noir. Plate of food, a plat du jour, €7 a day. Lots and lots of pensioners, people living on a budget, came for lunch. This is the kind of food we typically made. Lots of vegetables, lots of vegetarian stuff. We made stuffed peppers all the time. That's polenta fries and some zucchini, like a summer ratatouille. Lots of pasta. Okay, but I'm going to tell you the story. It's short, and it was my happiest day of field work. It was called Steak Night. One afternoon in late November, I arrived at Belmondo to find my boss, Nina Cornelis. That's her. Chef, trainer, and kitchen manager, dancing in the kitchen to the song Fire by the Pointer Sisters. Romeo and Juliet, Samson and Delilah. You don't want me to sing it, but I hope you heard it in your mind. She spelted. She saw me and shrieked, "I have steaks. Can you believe? Steaks here?" I could not believe. Brussels social restaurants typically serve the cheapest foods cooked by means of the least sophisticated techniques. Vegetable curries, spaghetti with meatless sauce, and lots of stuffed peppers. Beef, on the other hand, is popular in Belgium and expensive, and also requires a lot of technical skill to prepare well. The steaks came from Delhaize, she enthused, referring to a supermarket chain's outpost down the block, a store that sends food parcels to Belmondo twice a week. Usually these parcels contain a large array of fresh vegetables on the verge of expiring, and a fair number of them that already had, plus packets of frozen sausages and other meats that have been marked down, sometimes 2 and 3 times, but never sold and now are a day or two away from their expiration dates. When the food arrives, the staff immediately get to work. Vegetables are pureed into soups and sauces, fruits are cooked into crumbles and cobblers or transformed into ice cream. Belmondo has 4 freezers, and all of them are entirely so full that Nina said she cannot afford to take food from any more groceries. But there had never been steaks, and here were 18 New York strips defrosting on the counter, each about 10 ounces. Why didn't they sell, I asked. I thought to myself, in the height of Western Europe's summer vacation season, even charitable food distribution decreases. So maybe it makes sense that foods that would otherwise be sold are not. Even the very poor might be able to afford a city subway ticket, which could get a person to the North Sea coastal town of Ostend for a cheap camping weekend on the beach. Maybe that was it. Nina shrugged. She didn't care. These frozen expiring steaks were the best ingredients she'd ever received from any grocery to date. Now she had to figure out what to charge for them. This was tricky because for most of her clientele, paying for dinner was already a luxury. According to stickers on the package, one of these steaks in its prime was about €10. However, it had fallen to €2 by the time it landed here. I will sell them for €19, all inclusive, she decided. This meant that diners would get a bowl of soup, a pan-fried steak with roasted potatoes and sautéed green beans, and a scoop of homemade ice cream for dessert, all for €19. Of course, since Belmondo paid nothing for the steaks and nothing for the salaries of the interns, it would make a profit. And in accordance with the EU policy for social economy, all of those profits would have to be transferred directly into paying for the utilities and for the salaries of the trainers like Nina. Next, Nina said, "Gather round, I will show you how to cook a steak." Her cheeks were pink, her voice was high, and her smile was huge. The steaks were no longer frozen, but they were still cold. Most chefs let steak come to room temperature before cooking, so I queried. One thing I knew from a lifetime of restaurant work is that an ideal pan-seared steak should have a brown crust and a medium rare center. To achieve this, cooks must trigger the series of chemical reactions that cause meat to brown quickly. The faster the surface browns, the less likely it is that the interior will overcook. Allowing a steak to come to room temp before it hits the pan is best practice. It doesn't have to be perfect, Kelly, she said. We teach our cooks to make an okay steak, and that is what matters. First step, you season it well on both sides. Plenty of salt and pepper, she demonstrated. Then you get the pan very hot. She turned the flame under her pan until it licked the sides. In goes a good knob of butter, and you let it sizzle and just begin to brown. And then in we go with the steak. Nina used tongs to transfer the meat into the pan. A loud sizzle, the gamey scent of meat searing. Never ever flip a steak with a fork. Why? Because the juices will escape, and you want to save all of those juices. We could hear the scuttling customers arriving in the dining room. Touch to see if the steak is done, she said, explaining an old method for testing doneness. It can be done without a fancy digital meat thermometer, which of course she didn't have. Nina slid the steak onto the plate. Rest it 5 minutes while you get the rest of the plate together, she ordered, then demonstrated for her crowd of 5 cooks how to make a pan sauce. When that was done, she poured it over the steak. Voila. We took turns sampling. We were allowed to have one of the 18 steaks for the staff. The meat had a lovely golden brown sear on the outside and an admirably hot pink center, signs that it had been cooked with expertise. But it lacked the rich flavor and toothsome texture of meat that had never been frozen. Yet it remains one of the most memorable steaks I've ever eaten and the very best day of fieldwork I had. So thank you. And that is Mamadou from Senegal, her trainee. They were so happy about the steaks that there was a whole dance in the kitchen. And by the way, just because I am me, I had to show you, this was steak night at Belmondo, and that is filet mignon at Le Trèfle Noir. The difference is only about €80. And now I'm going to turn to my partner in conversation tonight, so Sarah Cooney, who works next door at the Root Cellar, and she has a branch also in Pittsburgh, and she runs a business. And also an organization called Feedwell Fridges that is doing this. So this is the number one question I have whenever I present my material at all is, why don't we have this? Why don't we have this? All this stuff in Brussels, why don't we have this? And the answer is that we do, but you have to know where to look. And we don't have such encouraging policy that helps Chef Sarah, so she has to do it all herself. So please join me in welcoming Chef Sarah. Yes, you can clap. Will you tell us the story of Feedwell Fridges and how you got it off the ground?
Oh, okay. Everybody can hear me? So 2020 happens, COVID comes around, and we have walk-ins full of food. We own 2 restaurants, one here and one in Pittsburgh. So I am like, well, what are we going to do with this? So I call our local food shelter, and I said, hey, I have a walk-in full of food. I need to do something with it. I'm going to make you soups. And they said, we don't know if we can take your soups. And I was like, well, I'm doing it anyways. I'll be there tomorrow. So, before we close down, the staff cuts up vegetables and we make enormous pots of soup. So we were told, restaurants were only going to be closed for 2 weeks. I was like, so we'll just get rid of the things we know won't last 2 weeks. So, we cut up vegetables and everything like that. So 2 weeks go by and restaurants are still closed. I was like, well, there's still people and they're still hungry. And I call over again to the food shelter and they're like, yeah, we'll take your soup. We have lines of people needing food. And I was like, okay, great. COVID goes on for a couple of months and I continue to make soups and casseroles and I call my U.S. Foods and some farmers and stuff like that. And they're like, we're going to send you stuff. And I was like, great. So this goes on. And then, we start reopening and restaurants are allowed to open and the soups kind of fell by the wayside. But, we're still thinking about it. And at the end of the weekend, we pack everything up and we bring to the food shelter. So then I go to a conference for women in hospitality. And I'm talking to a woman who's sitting next to me, and I said, oh, well, what do you do? And she goes, oh, I run community fridges in Des Moines. And I was like, wait, what? And I go, wait, I want to know more. And she's like, okay, after the meeting. And I was like, okay. So I talked to her, and I said, how? Why? Where? How do I do this? And she goes, are you serious? And she goes, nobody ever wants to know. And I said, I'm serious. And she's like, okay, I have a program. I have a whole pamphlet I can send you and all this kind of stuff. So, later in the day, I called my wife and I was like, Susan, I got a great idea. She goes, great. We have 2 restaurants we got to get running. Well, let's hold off on this. And I was like, okay. And, I come back and I tell her all about it and I start researching it. She goes, you research it, you figure it out. So I call Chatham County Libraries. And I call the libraries and I was like, I want to talk to you about something. And they're like, okay. So we're still in Zoom time. So I have all these librarians on a Zoom call. And I say, I want to do this. I want to put a fridge at the library. And the chief librarian goes, what do you mean? I was like, it's called a community fridge. It's free food for people who want. They take what they want. They leave what they don't. No questions asked. She goes, well, I don't know if I want those people here. And I said, those people? I said, what do you mean? People who read books? She goes, no, those people. I was like, the people who come in and use your internet? And she's like, no, those people. And I was like, okay. And then there's a few other librarians who are in smaller towns. They're like, hold on a second. Can we talk later on? I was like, okay. So meanwhile, I'm like, I'm going to find something else. So we'd contact a local church. And he's like, I will help you. He's like, I love this idea. And we struggled for a long time trying to figure a place. And we finally got our first fridge in Siler City, which is a very poor town here in Chatham County. And we put our first fridge in. And, you know, people kind of looked and they were like, what is this? What's going on? And, you know, we just put this fridge and it has Feedwell logo. And we have a little pamphlet that explains what it is and what you can do and all that kind of stuff. And it worked. So we go on, and then we have placed 5 fridges since 2023. And we have taken off food waste, 40 tons worth of food from grocery stores, and we've made 40,000 meals today.
How does your pickup work?
We pick up from 4 grocery stores, catering companies, farmers markets, U.S. Foods, and then we have volunteers every day that stock 5 fridges, and then we also help stock a fridge here on UNC campus. So we get volunteers every day, 7 days a week. All volunteers. There is no paid person at Feedwell.
Any grocery store pushback?
Yes. So I have had pushback from a grocery store that is well known, that is not from North Carolina. And I have had a pushback from grocery stores that are North Carolina owned that advertise that they help lots of food banks. We've also had issues with larger food banks coming in and saying, hey, no, that is ours. And I'm like, aren't we all helping the same people? So it's kind of difficult with the larger corporations don't want to lose to these little things. So we just kind of have to work around it. And they don't take everything. We pick up on days they don't pick up, things like that.
When you pick up, you have to go around to the back.
Nope, we go right in through the front door. We go right in through the front door. We come pushing out with giant carts, and we get people who say, oh, you must be hungry today. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to eat 50 boxes of donuts.
One of the things that Sarah and I talk about is the fact that it's almost impossible to do this work without private funding. So you have other partners and donations, donors.
So we run solely on donations and grants. We do not, obviously there is nobody getting a salary at Feedwell. And we actually run Feedwell out of Root Cellar. So Feedwell has taken over most of the walk-in of our restaurant in Pittsburgh.
One of the things that my canny UNC students are quick to pick up on when I talk about my work is the fact that one of the Kulturhemm's corporate partners is Nestle. And that's how it works. And so as one of them said, but that's neoliberalism. And it's like, right, that's true. That is a fact. And when Sarah and I sat down and talked about it, one of the things we discussed is why we need to bring people who have money to the table.
Yeah, they have the money to support the little people. And I, being a chef, I have a hard time with sometimes the big corporations. But one of the largest corporations, Cargill, owns everything or makes everything for everybody. They make McDonald's is everything. They have changed McDonald's to using fresh farm eggs, which is huge for McDonald's. And that just happened late last year. They also, if you are holding a baseball, an actual baseball like the MLB uses, it is a Cargill hide. So they sell all the hides to MLB baseball and they make baseballs out of it. So it's not going into waste. And they have just recently started a candle, and they take the tallow from the beef and are making candles out of them. So they're using the byproduct of things that would just get thrown away or, ground up and not used. And so that's really big for me to see these big companies doing things like that.
And it's not to say, I don't think either one of us would argue that Cargill are model citizens or that Nestle are model citizens or any of it. It is one of the arguments that I make in the book is it's a convenient way that the state is offloading a lot of its responsibility for recirculating food onto private business. And it's worth pointing that out. My dissertation advisor is here, so I want to make sure she knows that I said that. And it's an important and very reasonable critique, but when you are doing your boots on the ground, I would like you to be able to talk a little bit more, if you will, about what is required to move food around, even a community as small as ours, as opposed to big city.
So we struggle. Obviously, you stated that most food is wasted before it ever hits grocery store shelves. When we first started Feedwell, we went to every restaurant in Pittsburgh, and I sent letters and emails and calls, and I said, if you have waste, call us. And I had people say, we don't have food waste. And I was like, that's lying, because every restaurant has rolls that weren't eaten. They have rolls that weren't eaten. They have soup that sat in a warmer for 6 hours, and you're not legally allowed to use it after said 6 hours. So what are you doing with that? And, they were like, well, okay. And I was like, if you're doing so well and selling all of your food, buy me a case of dried pasta. We have the grocery stores that if we aren't collecting it, and if anybody else isn't collecting it, they're throwing it in the trash. So they're making like waste of plastic and all those things, and then the food waste, where they could be feeding people. It's sad that our country is not like the EU, and we don't have laws.
Well, the EU is not like the EU anymore either.
Sure.
But
we'll wait to see what happens next week.
One of the things I wanted you to talk about also is how you see expanding your program.
So we want to double our fridges. We want to get them everywhere. I've talked to a woman who was a principal at one of the schools, and she came to me. She was eating lunch, and she goes, how do I get one of your fridges here? And I was like, well, you're a school. That's, the state's going to have to approve it. And she's like, well, I'm like one of the poorest schools. I said, let us know. We were more than happy. We eventually want our own space. And it's just Feedwell, so we can house more things. We can get volunteers in and things like that. I have the grand idea of Feedwell Cooks, where I then train people to cook, learn basic skills, get sanitation degrees and all that kind of stuff, and then go out and join the workforce, not just at dishwashers. I'd love to have Feedwell Grows, where we grow vegetables and then we use them in the food we cook and also put in the refrigerators. I mean, it's just educating everybody. Everybody who walks into a grocery store, we buy so much stuff.
I think people would be shocked to see how much food there is. Like, you could take double the food that you are currently taking, and there would still be tons more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we got over 500 pounds on Saturday of turkeys, prime rib, and hams that were all going to get thrown away. And I'm talking Thanksgiving turkeys. We can't really put a whole turkey in the fridge because people don't have the ability to cook a turkey. So we then cook the turkey and turn it into something. But it's
you can't
just
sell it.
There are Feedwell food and there is root cellar food, and they cannot go per the health department, which is sad. I mean, we could also do a lot with the food. They sell it. I mean, even the big companies sell it at a discount, and then they call me and say, "Hey, we got some stuff. You want it?" And we take it.
We have a couple of reps from Durham Community Fridges. If you guys would like to stand up and introduce yourselves, this would be a great time to do that. Please.
Yeah. Can we sit down there?
Sure, please, come on.
Yeah. You guys can
Just so you know what is out there.
Go first.
Oh, okay. Hello.
I'm Charmene, and I'm one of the community fridge organizers in Durham. I use she, her pronouns.
Hey y'all, my name's Taylor. I'm a co-organizer with Durham Community Fridges with Charmene, and there's a couple other members here from our group. And we are a mutual aid group, so we're not a nonprofit. We don't have any fiscal funding at all, so we're completely reliant on community efforts and resources. And we started in 2021, and with a fridge that I had in my house, and I was getting a new fridge, and I wanted to have somewhere to take this fridge, and I had friends in Philadelphia who'd started community fridges, and so I wanted to do that in Durham. And so found Shar, who is also wanting to start a community fridge, and some other folks. I work for an organic produce company, so we have a lot of resources as far as leftover veggies to distribute. So yeah, we've launched our first fridge in 2022 and another one in 2023. And we're about to launch our third fridge in 2025, this spring. And similar to your effort, you collect from all across the city, grocery stores, a lot of restaurants who have food that they just want to excess food, produce distributors, farmers, and we have volunteers that we just aggregate in like a Discord, which is like Slack. I don't know if any of you use that, but it's just a community platform. And we just put out, hey, the Durham Co-op has a pickup for us. Can anyone go get it? Someone goes, gets it, puts it in the fridges. And we just do that every day. And we've been doing that every day for a couple years now. And it's going really well. And there's a huge need. We fill up the fridge almost every day. And it gets emptied every day. And ours are outside. So they're 24 hours access. And I think people really like that because it gives them some kind of like privacy, and they can do it on their own time, on their own terms. We don't regulate how much food is taken, and that model seems to work really well for a lot of people. So,
I'll say that I learned about community fridges in about 2020. I was living in Miami, Florida when the pandemic was starting, and I started volunteering to pick up food from Trader Joe's to take to fridges that existed in Miami. And I thought that was so cool. And then when I moved here in 2021, I thought there has to be a fridge here that I can volunteer for, but there were not. So through the internet, we met, and it was, I think, 9 of us that began the project together. And yeah, we opened our first fridge outside of a church, and our second fridge is outside of a store, and our third fridge is going to be outside of a coffee shop. And like Tay said, food gets put in there at 9 a.m. and it's full, like overflowing with food, produce, just everything you can think of. And in an hour, it's all gone. As we're filling the fridge, people are coming up to grab stuff. It's beautiful and chaotic. And there's so much to say. Yeah, we're volunteer run. We first started with, the 8 or 9 of us that were physically in Durham, and eventually after our second fridge expanded. And really the biggest limitation, I think, is legalities behind giving away food for free. And what if somebody gets sick from the food that I gave you? And everybody's afraid of litigation and responsibility, and it's like, just give me your food. So if there were more people who didn't focus on that and really change their perspective and learned about all these other programs that are going on everywhere, we would normalize the idea of just giving away food for free because it's there. And it's a right. We believe that, food is a right. So, yeah.
Awesome.
That was kind of all over the place. If you have a specific.
I'm going to now indulge you in some pictures of me making model bread, and then making model bread with my students, and invite you all to please open the floor to you and ask questions of any of us as you wish. I see you, Blair Pollock. What's up?
Hello. Well, 3 things are up. One is that somebody raised the question of why don't we have regulations like that in the EU? So the Durham rep in the legislature, Zach Hawkins, did in fact bring up a food waste recovery bill in the legislature last year, and I think he's going to try again to bring it forward with mandates any grocery store making more than a ton a month or a ton a week, I forgot now which, of food waste must recover their food waste either through redistribution, composting, etc. So yeah, there's something like that. Massachusetts and a few other states have that already, and it's really springboarded a lot of composting industry and the kinds of bigger versions of the kind of what you heard here. Second thing is that Table, the organization here that feeds hungry children, is working to expand their operations. So this spring we'll be starting farming. If you know where the Wan Buddhist temple is, in Old 86, the county has, we hope, about to give us 3 acres to farm there. So we'll be looking for people to help farm that, and anybody who's interested in that, get in touch with Table around that. And then the third thing is more of a question, which I guess I'm kind of a heretic on this one. What about asking the people who are recipients of food to be able to pay what they will for the food they get? Because it's all about sustainability and financial sustainability. You're going to, as an organization like these, you're going to go around with your hand out all the time, or you're going to say, give what you can back. And so far I've heard, silence about that one from organizations that have raised that with. So I don't understand why that can't be part of the program.
Yeah, I think that's a really smart suggestion. The social restaurant I talk about, Belmondo, it's a sliding scale. They have a set price for people to pay, but it's recommended, and you can pay what you can afford. And they make a profit. They are required by the state to funnel it all back into the restaurant. But it's a big win for them because they can operate now entirely without grants. So they can operate no matter what. They're not ever going to lose their funding because they're self-sufficient business. But they have a sliding scale. And Kulturahim has the one in the zero food waste in the abattoirs, same deal. If you come and cook and volunteer, you don't have to pay for lunch. So there's some moves in that direction. But I think you're right.
Can I say something about that?
So I think that, at least for community fridges, which is something that we know more about, is the idea that we believe that nobody should have to pay for food, whether they can't or they can, because of several reasons. But the point is that not every program has to run the same. So what we believe to be best, another program can do differently, and that's fine. It's just, we try to be authentic with the kind of world that we want to build. And we want to build a world where nobody pays for food because there's so much that we don't really have to do that.
Yeah, abundance mindset.
And the politics there are quite different from, I would differentiate, if you don't mind, from a food bank that I think just keeps instantiating a cycle of givers and receivers. It was really hard. Sarah and I have discussed this. Sarah Dempsey and I have discussed this. There's communication studies professor at UNC. The cycle of givers and receivers in food banks that is, I'm pretty critical of food banks in the book for that reason, because it's we give, you take. We give, you take, we give, you take. And it's I think Blair is talking about a different sort of politics where community members feel empowered. There are community grocery stores with low-cost things with food waste where you pay a little bit, you pay as you can. Other models, other ways of slicing it.
But we can't. So our food is expired. So I legally can't accept money. I can't sell it. I can't use it in the restaurant where I would make a profit. But there are pay-what-you-can restaurants. There's one in Raleigh. There's one in Boone. We have one coming to Pittsburgh.
There's one coming to Durham too.
Yeah, so they are coming, and you pay on a sliding scale. So let's say you can afford the $20 sandwich, but the guy behind you can't. So he gets his sandwich for free, or he says, hey, can I volunteer and wash dishes? You can do that. Or you might say, I only have $3 in my pocket. Can I pay that? But to collect the expired food, it's against the law to charge.
We're not talking about charging, just here's the donation bucket that exists.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's kind of like nickel and diming people.
Well, the flip of that is when you said earlier, a lot of people are ashamed to accept charity, if you will, and they'd rather put in what they can.
Yeah, I mean, we've had
I'm
people.
Some of my weight here.
Yeah, well, we've had people who have said to us and said, thank you so much for this refrigerator. I now don't have to decide about my medication that I have to take to keep myself alive or the food that's going to keep me alive.
Oh, yeah.
So, I
Don't
mean,
get me wrong. I'm not saying you must. I'm just saying you create the opportunity for people to contribute, and they will.
Yeah, well, and a lot of these people who come to the refrigerators also can't get money or can't get food from a shelter or something like that because they might be undocumented. So they're not getting anything. Yeah.
The donation piece is great though, because there's people with money to donate
Yeah.
for the bigger. So we personally, our organization, we fundraise depending on the project. So we'll fundraise if we need materials to build a structure to house the fridge and the pantry and things like that. So fundraising is a part of it.
I was just going to ask about, to change the subject, to ask about like a farmer food share. Is that another?
Yeah, they're a nonprofit food bank,
Yep.
or not food bank, but food hub in Durham.
Do they or cooperate with? Do you guys collaborate?
We do, yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the food is shared. So
Yeah.
food that's picked up on a Saturday by one of our volunteers goes to the fridges and then goes to the food share for the Saturday morning distributions, for example. Yeah.
Yep. And those aggregators, food hubs, like the place I work, it's called Happy Dirt. You've probably seen our produce in stores and stuff, but they're really great. We need this infrastructure to be able to have organizations like us that, and they're just small small scale infrastructure. And something we really realized in Helene when we were sending so much food and supplies up to the Asheville area was there's no infrastructure for that on the government level. We were that infrastructure. And so to see Farmer Food Share and all the food that they can distribute and have these hubs and see places like Happy Dirt and food banks for sure. But I think part of these kind of projects, we can really reimagine what that infrastructure is and like what it can look like for us in the future. So forming mutual aid hubs actually is really cool too. So just a thought.
Yeah, in this process of cycling food through all of your projects and systems, do you have to interact with any health department requirements, or is there any oversight, or how does that work?
I'll just say that when we first had when we had the location set, I said, I might as well email somebody at the health department and see if this is going to be an issue before we plug it in. And so I emailed somebody, they said no, and I said, all right. So we haven't really thought about it because
One step ahead.
I don't know. So there's a Good Samaritan Act you probably know more about.
And then so since I run both restaurant and nonprofit, I get inspected as the root seller, but if something is labeled, we put an FWF on it, the health inspector knows that is never going to be used in the restaurant. So she just shuts her eyes and she knows we have two rolling carts that are full of food, and she knows that is for feedwell. She knows I know I'm not going to keep it sitting out in the kitchen for 3 hours and then put it in an oven and then let it sit on a counter another 6 hours, whatever. She knows I'm not going to do it. But they have no jurisdiction because no money.
They're not selling it.
Yeah,
if you're
we're not selling
food.
So
That like pesky health
Yes.
department. They're not messing with you.
But if you have a pay what you can, the health inspector will inspect you.
So that, cooking food in a marketplace, like this, that looks like this, is pretty, I had to swallow pretty hard. There's no health inspection going on there. There's a rat ran across my foot. Like that's what that is. That's an abandoned outdoor marketplace. That's what's going on there. And I couldn't, in my own Americanness, handle. It was like, where are the inspectors? And they don't care because we're giving this food away. It's not, no money is changing hands, so we can do this way.
And we actually have, with the Durham County, they're giving us their old refrigerators, their health department. They're excited about it, which is really cool. And we have so far a good relationship with them and an understanding. So I think, depends on where you are too.
Because you can get arrested for giving somebody water in some places. So
Yeah.
Tonya.
Thank you for the presentation from everybody. This was really great. One thing that stuck with me as you were talking about your work, Kelly, was the idea that parsley isn't food. There's something here about the construction of personhood and eating that has to do with the food should taste good. can you talk a little bit more about what the food means about turning these people into people and not just
Right.
Animals that have to be fed?
I was so, I mean, it's like telling a bad story on myself. I was like, what is their parsley doing here? It's like, right, the food still gets to taste good. It was just so random and out of the blue. We're going to tie up packages of herbs and spices. Oh, I think the way that we are socialized here is that those things don't look like that. They come in those little McCormick jars, right? So it was sort of shocking to see all these fresh herbs, and they're expensive. They're expensive in the other markets around town. And what are they doing? Like, that's also in my mind was like, how will that sustain somebody? That's not, something you can eat and gain calories and sustain yourself. What is that? It seems so superfluous. And it was such a great check that but your food can still be really delicious and have spices and have flavors. It was a game changer for me in how I was thinking about it. And to your point, if we think of food as a right, and we think about to see what these women would have done for this mint, it was just, if they were lucky I wasn't in charge, there would be no mint ever for any of the other programs. It was just please give them the mint. You see what it means to people to be able to connect to the flavors that mean something to them, all people. It was incredibly moving moment. And sort of the opposite of forcing Muslim people to take pork, who really didn't want it. Yes, Shannon.
My question actually follows my colleague Antonia's question. One of the things that, one of the tenets of mutual aid was solidarity, not charity. And I was wondering from your book, since you start with that truffle, right? It seems as if you're moving toward changing our definition, the definition of food. Who deserves it? Is our relationship to food going to always already be transactional? Are we going to develop a different relationship to food? Which I think is part of the question that's circulating around here. Do you think you're going to be changing the definition of food in the book? Have you changed your idea?
That would be amazing to think that I could do that. So thank you, Sharon.
I think it's possible to do big things.
What I really wanted to do was honestly change the definition of waste. That's sort of where it all started for me, is seeing all that food that was thrown away was like, why? That is so useful. And then I was gently nudged to think about utility versus exchange value in very old school Marxist ways. And what was constituting waste seemed suddenly so arbitrary to me. And then you go down kind of a rabbit hole with best by and best before and use by dates, which are absolutely meaningless. There should be a date on something that is if you eat this past this, it will kill you, and otherwise nothing else, right? Because it's really confusing, and there are consumers who live and die by those dates that are meaningless, like Best Buy on a package of pasta that could outlast all of us. So thinking about that kind of stuff is what I really wanted to change what counted as waste, because so much of it, this term that I'm required to use in this book, surplus edible but unsellable food, is kind of bullshit, right? It's food, it's not waste. But because you can't sell it, it has to be called this other thing. Or because grocery stores can't sell it, a traditional marketplace can't sell it. But it still has all this value. So that's really what I want to think about.
And if I could add, I love what you just said. It's beautiful. And to us in mutual aid, that really goes back to abundance versus scarcity. In capitalism, we operate on a scarcity mentality, yet we just look around and there's abundance everywhere. There's so much food. 40% of it's wasted every year. So this goes back to reframing how we actually see just everything in our daily lives. And do we consider it waste, or do we consider it something that is very valuable? And how do we see our resources?
Right.
Yeah.
Amy Cook, my colleague Amy Cook, who's an environmental scientist, and I talk about this a lot, about the EPA's role and the state's role in getting to decide what constitutes waste, and the kind of messages about food waste that exist now. If you like food waste messaging, you're going to get a whole lot more of it. Except what it's going to be is very finger wagging, don't throw that apple away, don't throw that berry away, don't. It's all very focused on shopping. don't buy more berries than you can have in your refrigerator. And I'm just so here to tell you, it's the last line of this book, that if you throw away a raspberry, you're not killing anybody and you're not going to die. It's such a giant systemic problem. And a lot of my critique of the EPA has been focusing on individual consumer activities rather than systemic problems. But now I have to change my critique of the EPA because I would like there to still be an EPA, you know, like. So I'm sort of thinking about it in those ways. But if we could think about waste as a like more expansive category, I mean, everything is a spectrum now, right? But like maybe food is a spectrum of edibility, and we could think about it in those ways rather than like, I must throw this away, or I am bad if I don't eat all the raspberries that I bought. Marcy.
You know, how do you, this is amazing and really just such a critical place for us to be, especially right now as we face this inauguration. But how do you bridge, again, the mutual aid and the incredible tradition of volunteer and of philanthropy that has fed our needy nation forever, from churches to food banks to, you know, within this faulty, wrapped up system of capitalism? But how do you bridge it to our local governments and the food groups that are organizing through county, you know, through county and state and city government? How do we, what are you thinking personally as you've been doing this about how do you push?
Amazing questions.
How do you push to the next? It's so impossible. I mean, I know we all are like, well, we just get out there and we damn do it. We give people the food because the system is so broken. But I wonder what you've been thinking about.
I like policy with teeth. I don't like policy with incentives. One of my work spouses, and I discuss this all the time, Lindsay Taylor, nutritional epidemiologist who studies food labeling. I think policy has to have teeth. There's a lot of like conversation that happened in Brussels before this policy that happened. It was like, what we should do is incentivize and give people a tax break. But Sarah, it's not enough. That is not enough for grocery stores. They don't need it. They're not interested in it. But if you find them, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's super effective. So that is where I would start. It wasn't that hard for the EU to get that policy going, and it's just made a big change. But at the same time, like it's a big enough umbrella, right? Like that mutual aid organization, Kulturaham, is using up 60% of the wasted produce in that market. And they are a baby NGO that started doing that. And it wasn't even like their goal wasn't even food waste recuperation. It was how can we use this abandoned urban space during the day when no one else is here, when it's just a wasteland. We can invite some like moms and little kids, and maybe we can get some people to donate produce and we can start making lunch. And it's reduced the food waste in that market by 60%, which is measurable. So like all of it and some nice policies. I don't think policy is going to save us all from everything, but it would be a really good place to start. Like take the $1 million that the EPA is spending on like, you are bad, don't throw that away, and buy some fridges in Durham and stuff like that.
But that was that was a country law, or?
It was EU compulsory policy.
Okay.
And it was shame-based. It was like, you are wasting too much food just like the United States. And the EU hates that. So we're going to do something about it now. And then this little nation of Belgium, little tiny Belgium, which is like, has the most bloated government on earth, which is not me saying that, like political economists say it. They started food waste initiatives at every level, like your baby commune town all the way up to the EU will fund food waste initiatives. It was pretty overnight that they got it going.
Maybe just one more question, so we're rolling over.
Dr. Taylor.
You might already know what I'm going to say, but you know,
Oh, I do. I do. Bring it.
Look, I hold a grant funded by the EPA to look at household level food waste. So we teach together, so I can say these things. But
we talk about this offline even.
You know what, first of all, I think your point is really well taken, that in the U.S., when it comes to food policy, we like to focus on individual moral failings, and so that we don't have to grapple with systemic issues. At the same time, when we think about what's going on at the individual level, why are people, half of our food waste is coming at the household level, some of that comes back to the food industry. So first of all, food labeling, expiration dates, and whether people understand them, and whether we're actually like regulating this in a way that's meaningful, so people know that if something's best by date is passed, they don't have to throw it out, it's still okay. So there's a policy angle there too. And then I would say that the food industry is responsible for promoting
Excessive
supersized
choice.
meat, buy one, get one, all of these types of things that are creating some of this food waste that we're seeing. And so it's thinking about all of these different aspects, the markets and the grocery stores in this piece, and also what kinds of foods are we all buying and surrounded by, and how can we change that to try to reduce the waste as well.
That's true.
It's not really a question, but
I
more
agree.
like, I
More
guess,
of a
how would
comment.
you- yeah, sorry, classic academic move. I guess, you know, would that affect your thinking in terms of how you're approaching this policy?
Just one ethnographer. No, what I will say is you're absolutely right. And one of the most haunting images Lindsay shows our Intro to Food Studies classes, which is a big class at UNC, and it's nice because it bridges nutrition and science and culture and our mutual interests, including on waste. There's an image of our two little girls who are crazy fans of Frozen standing in front of an aisle of yogurt, and they're wearing their Frozen costumes, and there's so many beautiful yogurt, like pink and sparkly yogurt containers behind them, and they're just like, yogurt wonderland, right? And you think about that kind of excessive amount, right? But that's how it works. Like, where else is late stage capitalism going to go but to keep making all of that yogurt? It's required to be a global food. To be a global food economy, it necessitates the production of all of this waste. So it's sort of like what we tell our students, like, I will go fund your revolution, got me, but in the meantime, maybe we could just like recirculate some of that stuff that is out there, like get all of those yogurts to mouths before it's bad. Does
the EU do better on that part of it? Like, would you say that they're less likely to push so much excess food into the system to begin with?
Their grocery stores are smaller, which it sounds like a silly answer, but it's actually quite helpful because they don't have the space. Like, they don't have the space to have a Walmart superstore. Definitely not a little tiny super dense country like Belgium. Like, we went to the grocery store there and it's like, the aisles are so tiny and then you feel crazy, right? Like, this is what grocery store is supposed to be like, right? So I think that is part of it. I think that there is just such outsized demand, and now we're used to that as consumers. When we first started going to groceries in Belgium, they closed every day from noon to 1 so that workers could eat lunch, which, like, if someone told me that, I would have been like, awesome. But as a shopper, I was like, what is happening? No one wants to make money here, right? Like,
I'll say too on that, I think in Europe, for at least on the farmer side, there's more cooperative systems. Like Italy, from what I've seen anyway, operates mostly on a lot, like all the cheese, the Parmesan, the olive oil, that stuff. They're all cooperatives, and so they have buying power, and they don't need to.
I love you, Bill Ferris.
They don't need to overproduce as much as we do here because we're again operating on a scarcity. Have to grow as much as you can and try to sell as much as you can. Sell it or smell it, as they say in the produce industry, which is really sad. So I don't know. It's just another insight there.
I want to say something about education that Sarah brought up is like something that we see a lot is that people don't know what a community fridge is. So something that I could urge everybody here to do is tell a friend about a fridge. Like, let them know that that concept exists, because a lot of people just don't know. You know, we'll say we have community fridges around town and people are like, what do you mean? So it is education, and I see that as a way that we can bridge that gap that was brought up earlier in that, and I'm not an economist or anything, but if we spread the word about fridges, people start understanding that free food is possible. There's so much fresh, good, free food that we can eat. Maybe we'll, as a, you know, people in the supermarkets say we actually don't need to pay that much for that food. And maybe it'll even out to where people understand that it doesn't have to be that expensive because we have so much of it that's being thrown away. Does that make sense?
and I should say also to my undergraduates, there are undergraduate dumpster diving clubs at UNC and at Duke who know all about community fridges and are way ahead of all of us. Sarah sees my UNC students all the time at food distributions. It's a little bit different. The dumpster diving clubs are a little bit different in ways that you might completely predict based on the institutions. One of them is like much more out and proud and posts their videos online, and the other one kind of does it in the dark of night behind the Harris Teeter on 9th Street, so you can imagine that. But there are lots of students who already know how to connect with community fridges. But I'm being told to wrap it up. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. I want to thank our panelists for joining me.